Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you. A lot to talk about today. The dossier. It was initiated by some Republican candidate. I don't know who, maybe you do. During the primary, there were 17 candidates in the race. President Trump, then candidate Trump, got the nomination, and it was taken over by the Clinton team. And we understand that it was at that point that Christopher Steele, who had been doing some research, was actually hired. What should we think about this?
Well, as you mentioned, Andrea, it was long reported, I think even as far back as January, that this began by a firm that hired Mr. Steele for a Republican candidate or candidates, and it was later after the primary taken up by the Democratic candidate. So none of this really, I think, comes as much of a surprise. It is the first confirmation of what had been reported at the very beginning of the year. In terms of what we make of that, I think that the key issue for the investigation is how much of the dossier is accurate, and the fact that it started out being paid for by a Republican candidate and later for someone affiliated with a Democratic candidate really doesn't shed much light on those questions. And of course, the intelligence community assessment didn't rely on the dossier when it concluded that the Russians had intervened and that it had intervened on Donald Trump's behalf and against Hillary Clinton. Interestingly, though, in terms of Mr. Steele, he is reported to have been widely respected among intelligence professionals. And as some of his reports are very early on, he may have been aware of the Russian efforts to help Mr. Trump even before our own intelligence agencies. So there are certain things that we have been able to corroborate in his work and others that we remain in the business of investigating.
Now, the House investigation has been widely criticized as dysfunctional, despite many say your best efforts and some of your colleagues, and in fact your Republican counterpart. Because of the chairman's engagement, the subpoenas that were issued by Devin Nunes, some of the efforts. I want to ask you about what he did yesterday and whether that is part of an effort. Well, you tell me what you think is going on here.
Yeah. Well, Andrea, we really have made the best effort possible to work together to make this bipartisan. And as I said from the very beginning of the investigation, we'll only add value this together and arrive at a common conclusion. But we don't control the committee, and the chairman has engaged in a number of acts that have caused our committee to fall in disrepute, the first being the trip to the White House, of course, the whole unmasking investigation, which was designed, I think, to distract attention from the Russia probe, and now these latest additional investigations of Hillary Clinton that go back years, and I think everyone recognizes are merely an effort to distract attention from the Russia investigation. So that's a disservice to what we're trying to do. Nonetheless, Mr. Conaway and I try to keep our focus where it ought to be, and that is investigating Russia's interference in our election and in our affairs and what we need to do about it. But yes, these have been a terrible distraction, and those distractions are now multiplying. But I view this as just further obstacles we'll need to overcome to try to get to the truth here.
Ben Rhodes, the former Deputy National Security Advisor, is supposedly in there for a meeting, an interview today. Is this part of unmasking as well?
Well, I'm not going to comment on particular witnesses, but I can say that we have brought in a number of people as a part of the unmasking inquiry. And it's perfectly appropriate for us to do oversight of unmasking and figure out, are the procedures being followed? Do we need to change the procedures in any way? But there hasn't been any evidence of wrongdoing here. There's been an effort, I think, that goes back to the president's first tweets, where he claimed that he was the victim of Obama administration wiretapping in Trump Tower. That's the origin of the unmasking inquiry. When there was no evidence of that, then they fell back on the argument, well, even if there was no wiretapping, maybe there was incidental collection. When there was no evidence that that was improperly done, then it morphed into, well, maybe the unmasking was improperly done. There being no evidence of that, we're moving on now to investigating once again. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and we have had to occupy part of our committee time doing these other probes.
Why shouldn't the uranium deal be investigated?
Well, it'd be one thing if this was being done in good faith, but of course it's not. And we saw what happened with Benghazi. You can't do a good investigation if it's conducted in bad faith. And the Republicans here initiated these additional investigations, including the Uranium One deal, without even telling us that they wanted to do it or why, without informing myself or Mr. Cummings. So it's clear from the beginning and to the end that this is a partisan effort, and you just can't conduct a good investigation if you're not operating in good faith, and unfortunately they're not.
There are reports that the CIA director was meeting with Chairman Nunes right before he came out to announce these new investigations. Were you brought into those conversations, or maybe those reports are not true? Maybe you can clarify.
I wasn't part of any conversations about the initiation of these new investigations, so I can't comment on what meetings or discussions took place, but I can say this. There are 3 committees involved in these new investigations: Judiciary Committee, Government Reform Committee, and the Intelligence Committee. This had to be orchestrated with the approval of the Speaker of the House. And so this is a partisan effort to distract. It's a partisan effort aligned with what the White House has been urging, and Fox and Breitbart, and which there was no consultation with the Democrats in Congress. And I think that tells you all you need to know about whether this is in good faith or not.
Do you have confidence that the CIA director is not being political in this regard?
You know, I have concerns that I've expressed to the director about comments that he has made that would appear to diminish the significance of what the Russians did, as well as I took very strong issue with statements he made recently saying that the intelligence community had concluded that there was no effect on the outcome of the election. That's simply not the case. In fact, the intelligence community said quite to the contrary. That's not their job. They're not going to opine on what effect the Russian operation had on the outcome. And it's a very different thing to say there's no evidence that the tallying of the machines was interfered with, and to say there was no influence in the outcome. Let's remember that President Trump, by some estimates, cited the WikiLeaks disclosures over 140 times on the campaign trail. Clearly, he felt what the Russians were doing in the hacking and dumping of these documents was very influential, or he wouldn't have made it such a common part of his stump speech.
Adam Schiff, thank you very much.